made a couple spell secondary effects ideas up now, and assuming the rest of my system is implemented basically as is, particularly with 10 action points, not 8. Here goes. So I mentioned earlier in a video that acid attacks from magicians could reduce the target's armor by 30% for 2 to 3 turns, which would synergize with the fighters or the physical damage doers. But it could also synergize for increased fighter or rogue damage or abilities or safety with other spells because it's a 2 or 3 turn duration. So you could switch up which elements you're using on the fly and so on. And basically the next set of ideas is fire damage increasing damage taken by 15% for 2 to 3 turns, ice reducing dodge by 10% and action points by 2, lightning damage reducing magic damage done by the target by 25% for 2 to 3 turns, raw magic or kill magic reducing max HP by 20%, with a percent scaling model for recalculating current HP after debuff is on off. So basically, if you reduce total HP by 20%, then 100 HP turns into 80 HP, and for like 5 turns, we'll say, for this particular version of damage. And basically, the idea is 20%. If you hit them for 20% of their life HP, and you do the 20% damage reduction thing, or before you do the damage reduction thing, they lose 20 HP from your hit out of 100, and then when they get 80 HP for the 20% damage reduction of max HP, then they actually have recalculated their HP, so they've lost 20% of 80 HP. That way you can have multiple mages or one multiple scroll user debuff targets for physical damage doers. Or like a single mage doing 2 different damage types to debuff on 2 things at the same time, or same turn. Priests would not have access to debuff skills from their offensive magic by default. And it would be more expensive as well to compensate for the fact that priests can ignore any armor restrictions on their magic that mages have. However, the shaman class that I mentioned earlier that would debuff, a secondary debuff targets with his offensive magic, or get more powerful magic, so to speak, could do his version of Smite, which I've ripped from Jeff Vogel, Spiderweb Software's priest ability. And I'm ripping this basically from Avernum, the original Avernum, and also Exile 1 to 3. The early 2000s Avernum, not the current remake of a remake, because Avernum is technically a remake. This iteration and generation of Avernum is a remake of Avernum, the original, which is a remake of Exile 1 to 3. So Exile 1 to 3 and the first Avernum remake of Exile 1 to 3 had Smite that starts as a 1-target spell, and then as you advance in magic powers and so on, which I would make for the skill talent thing for the spell itself, it would turn from 1 to 3 targeted bolts depending on whether the skill rank is 1 to 5. So you get 2 spell bolts at rank 3 of the spell, and 3 spell bolts at rank 5 of the spell. And it would reduce, for the shaman class, it could reduce damage done by the target that's hit by it by 25%. Or Pillar of Flame would reduce dodge and crit chances of hit targets by 15% each, and it could be a single target spell, and then it could grow into a area spell that is the center, and then around it in a diamond shape would be 2 squares around it, basically. So maybe it would be a well, yeah, or maybe it'd be a square. I'm not sure, but it would be 3 by 3 basically for rank 3, and 4 by 4 for rank, or 5 by 5 for rank 5, and so on. And rank 1 and to 2 would be a single target. It would just be more powerful on hitting damage wise for rank 2 than rank 1. Slow could be an area of effect that affects a 1 to 5 area effect per 1 to 5 ranks. So basically, it would be a very wide ranged one spell of like 25 by 5 area of effect from a single target spell per 1 to 5 ranks. And haste could be a 2 to 10 or area effect around as an aura around the caster that affects friendlies only. Slows by 4 action points stacking with ice damage. So -4 action points and -2 action points leaves 4 action points left. And someone can cast a spell or use 2 scrolls or 2 potions or make an attack with 4 action points, but that's his entire turn. Or he can move 4 spaces or 2 spaces with the tower shield. So it would stack and really reduce and so on. And it would be a way of ganging up on a single target and so on. Haste would boost action points of the affected targets by 5 action points, stacking with something like Action Surge if that goes to any if that goes with any targets or anything like that. Offensive spells hit always, even if block activates, which reduces the damage by 50%. And I guess technically a dodge proc for spells can occur, which reduces the damage by 50%. And the two stack, but not exactly 100%. It's more like the block reduces damage done by 50%, which leaves 50% damage, and then 50% of 50% damage is 25% damage. So the spell would do anywhere from 100 to 50 to 25% damage if you block and dodge for that last one. This gives the defender class something extra against mages for its speciality. Technically, anyone with a shield could do both, but the defender would be really good at them. And this gives warriors a chance to beat mages pretty handily if they're specialized against mages and so on, but priests can outlast the defender without some backup for the defender and so on, and it's just a good way to do it. So there'd be 12 classes total. I mentioned 3. I mentioned Ranger, Barbarian, and Defender for Fighter. Rogue, Swashbuckler, and Bard for the Dexterity class. Maybe I would call it Thief instead of Rogue, and the Rogue is the Archetype, and the Fighter is the Archetype for the Strength class, and Rogue is the Archetype for the Dexterity class, and Thief is the one I would do for the stealing money and finding potions and so on. Specialty class. Warlock, Wild Mage, and what was the other one? I forget what the third mage class would be, but I forget what the third mage class was, but I think I mentioned the third mage class. I'm pretty sure I did that. If I didn't, then I would make Enchanter one of them, where their buffs are like twice as strong as you rank them up. So they like grow by 20% relative to baseline for the enchantments. That would be a good option for a third class, subclass for mages. Priests would have saints, which and crusaders or paladins, as you might call them, and shamans. And there would be a 13th class option at the beginning for each character as well. And the 13th option loses class-specific talents that you could pick for the other 12 and only have access to generic stat boosts as talents, but with a 20% boost to basic stat skill points. And maybe they'd have a talent every or they'd have a talent every level instead of every 2 levels or something. This enables priests and mage spells and weapon skills in strength, endurance, dexterity, and intelligence to be more generalized as a skill set for a particular class who forgoes us, or a particular character that forgoes or doesn't pick a basic, like an advanced subclass in a way that's unique to the other classes' system as a generalist, a very purposeful generalist who's solid in every way that they can imagine, basically, but loses some of the specialities that make for unique and interesting stuff to some extent, but you can still have some customizability about what they actually do and so on. They would just lose some of the absolute specialization skills, and they'd be pretty potent and strong in their own right. But mostly generic as opposed to specialized in an interesting way. So you could pick one character to be like that or something, or you could have a whole party of it, and you could still technically customize and individualize your characters, but you would lose out on some of the really advanced, unique, synergistic perks of the actual subclasses. So that's what I would do for magic damage secondary effects, and a little bit on the options for classes.